Welcome to the Essence of Liberty podcast. This is the horsemanship podcast where we discuss all things liberty to help you understand, connect, communicate, and play with your horse in a gentle, subtle, and force-free way. We'll get a bit nerdy about equine psychology and learning theory to understand the science behind it all. And we'll also dive into how to motivate your horse, ways to strengthen your relationship, solving those common problems, and how to use liberty as a way to build your horse up physically, mentally, and emotionally, all in half an hour or less. I'm Dr. Nadine Lindblom, former equine veterinarian, and I'd like to invite you to join me on this journey as a student of the horse. Hello, and welcome back for another episode. In this episode, I'd love to dive into the topic of working with your horse at liberty, but at a distance. One of my all-time favorite parts of liberty is where your horse can move freely around the space and even get a little bit energetic and playful, but still remain connected to you and still following your guidance. Because then you're able to direct all of this energy into different exercises and different movements that you want. And so much is possible within that space. It's definitely not uncommon to run into the issue where your horse wants to be with you all the time, because we do spend a lot of time building the connection and showing the horse what a nice place it is to be around us, and we're introducing food rewards as well, which is another factor why your horse may want to be in close proximity to you. So a lot of you may have experienced this situation where your horse wants to be glued to you, which isn't a bad problem. It's a better problem to have than your horse not wanting anything to do with you, of course. But it can also limit you quite a bit in what you can do with your horse. And similarly, if you've experienced that issue of your horse wanting to be glued to you all the time, you may have also experienced the issue where you ask your horse for more distance and they just disconnect and walk away, or they lose focus and walk away. So it almost gets harder to maintain the connection for your horse to stay mentally connected if the distance between you increases. So I want to firstly talk about 3 main reasons why distance is so incredibly useful, and then I want to dive into 5 different strategies that you can use to begin establishing this distance and introducing your horse to feeling more comfortable giving you more distance. So let's dive into the main reasons why this is so important. And the first reason, or one of the main reasons, is because it allows you to feel a lot more safe around your horse, especially when you start increasing the energy and when your horse becomes a little bit more playful and those sorts of things. If you have a feeling that your horse is going to come too close to you with that energy, you're going to become very hesitant in your own body language. You're going to get smaller in your body language, and you're probably going to want to step away from him a little bit. And that shrinking in your own body language and stepping back is actually drawing him closer to you. So it's kind of like a cycle. He gets a bit, he gets closer, and then you step away, then he gets even closer. And it's like this back and forth cycle of you kind of inadvertently asking him to come closer, but it's just because he's making you feel a little bit unsafe by how close he is to you. So when you establish this distance, you can be very comfortable with your horse picking up the energy and becoming quite playful without feeling like he's going to be coming too close to you. And when you feel safer, you're also going to be able to be a lot more confident and clear in your communication to him. The second reason is freedom of movement. If you imagine a horse moving really freely, you imagine those big floating trotting steps, or you imagine a big beautiful forward canter. You imagine him really springing off the ground and moving really powerfully. Us humans can't keep up with that. Well, at least I can't. I don't know about you, but I am not fast enough, I am not fit enough, and I am too scared to be close to that kind of energy. But I love when the horses start moving like that. I love that floating trot. I love it when they lift themselves really powerfully. I love it when they throw in a buck and a kick and they really, lift themselves really beautifully. I want that, but I don't want it right next to me. And the thing is that when the horse thinks that they have to be right next to you, then a lot is possible there. There's a lot of exercises you can do when you're right next to each other. But when they are next to you, they're restricted by your pace and your fitness level to an extent. I'm not the fittest person in the world, so I could run with my horse for a little while, But, if we're going to do a big trot, or if we're going to do, a canter or something like that, I can't keep up with them for very long. And they end up sort of contorting themselves in order to match our pace. So while there's a lot of exercises you can do next to each other, and it's definitely where a lot of exercises can start, being able to encourage your horse to have the freedom of movement, to be able to use the space around him and not be restricted by having to stay close to you, there is just so much more that's possible there. And this is also where posture work and collection can begin. So I love working towards collected movements, and that can begin when the horse starts to get energetic and playful, because that's when they're naturally going to use those types of movements. So if you have a very strong bridge signal, which we talked about in another episode, then you can capture those moments when the horse is beginning to collect himself or beginning to lift himself really well. And that brings me into the third reason why space and distance is so useful, is that you can actually see your horse. If you are right next to your horse and you're like working on posture and working on your horse moving in particular ways, it's really hard to get a very good view of how your horse is carrying themselves if you're next to each other. Then you can see, like his shoulder and his legs, but you don't get a good view for his entire body and how it's working together. You can get a good feel for it, but you get a better idea if your horse is a little distance away from you, so you can see the whole horse. So that's the third reason why distance is so useful, in that you can actually watch your horse and see how they're moving as a whole. It's a little bit easier. So those are my three main reasons why distance is so good and so useful to work with. Is, first of all, this feeling that you can feel a lot safer when it comes to higher energy, and your horse is kind of less likely to want to, continue crowding you if they do have the tendency to crowd you. And the second reason is that freedom of movement, and that they're not restricted by how fast or long that you can run for. And the third reason is that you can actually see your horse, you can watch how they're moving, which is going to mean that you can mark your behaviors in a much more accurate way. So how do you now go about establishing this in your Liberty work? The most important part is to have a really good foundation. So you need to have good connection, good communication, a good bridge signal, like a very clear bridge signal that your horse understands, and you've taken the time to introduce the food reward so that you have a good foundation already. If you don't have that foundation and your horse is anxious around the food, or they are, mugging you for food, or they're like in your pocket, all those sorts of things, that means that you need to spend a little bit more time working on relaxation around the food, and for the horse to be able to give you space around the food. So if you are still working on that, then don't go to this, because if your horse is anxious about the food, then asking him to give you distance is kind of going to cause him to get frustrated and conflicted, because he wants to be close to you, but you're asking him to go further away from you. So you have to spend the time ensuring that he can relax around the food before you put him in a situation where you want him to create more distance, to avoid those conflicting behaviors. The second thing is, you need to make sure that in all of this, when you're working with distance, is that you go to your horse with the food rewards. If every time you use your bridge signal, your horse dives into you and comes to you to take his food reward, then it's going to kind of defeat the purpose, because the entire time your horse is away from you, he's going to wait for the moment when he can come in, which means he's still going to be in this mental space where he's like crowding you mentally. He's like, can I come in yet? Can I come in yet? And he's constantly going to be pushing towards you, and you're constantly going to be sort of encouraging him to stay out there. And it's going to be this kind of battle, and it's going to be uncomfortable for both of you. So you need to establish this arrangement where he hears the marker signal and he knows that you're going to come to him with the food rewards. And in order to teach him that, you need to do it. So when you use the bridge signal, you need to be on your way towards him already to give him his food reward. You can't have this time in between where you allow him to come in, or you're like reaching in your pocket to get the food reward. You need to really be ready with a food reward to really go towards him, because once he starts anticipating that you're going to come to him instead, when he hears that bridge signal, he's just going to stop where he is and wait for you to come. And that means that this entire exercise, or this entire concept of giving you distance, is going to become so much easier for him, because he knows you're going to come to him and he doesn't need to come to you. So it's just going to fix so much stuff. So that's the first thing. You have to have the good foundation and you have to honor the arrangement of you coming to him for the food rewards. Now, to get into some strategies, the very first one that I like to use is what I like to call distance by destination. And if you're in the academy, there is a video on this in the cone exercises module. And this exercise is basically designed so that instead of trying to tell your horse to give you distance, you are giving him something to go around so that it's not you telling him to go away from you or to give you distance. You're waiting for him to make the decision to actually go around something, which in this case is a cone on the ground. Doesn't have to be a cone, can be anything at all. But you are teaching him that if he goes around the thing on the ground, then you're going to use your bridge signal and you're going to follow it up with a food reward. So you start that by walking next to him where he wants to be, and you walk up to the thing on the ground and don't leave any space where he can squeeze between you and the thing on the ground. So he's going to have to walk on the other side, and it's going to be completely by accident on his part, and you're going to mark and you're going to say he's the best horse in the whole entire world for going on the other side of this cone, that he really couldn't have made any other decision. So you're setting him up for success by walking towards the cone and making sure there's no space between yourself and the cone so that he ends up walking on the other side. And once he starts to learn that, you create more distance between yourself and the cone, and you wait for him to take the initiative to walk around the object. Or you can point towards it, or you can encourage him to go on the other side of it, more so that he then decides to walk on the other side of it without you really having to tell him to give you distance. He goes, oh, okay, well, I'm going to walk around this thing on the ground because then I get my marker signal and followed up with a food reward. And you can get creative with this exercise and use other objects that's on the ground or naturally in the environment. So you can go near trees or go near bushes, go near other things that you have around the training area or your horse's field. And every time he walks around something, you say, oh, well done. And you follow it up with a food reward so that he starts seeking to go around different objects. And this just makes him more comfortable with leaving you and giving you space without actually leaving you in order to walk away from you. He's just leaving you to go around the thing. And you have to make sure here in that moment that you use the bridge signal when that thing is between you, and then you go to him for the food rewards. So that's how this works. It's called distance by destination. He is going towards something and he is going potentially around something. And the second kind of strategy is similar, but you're using a mark on the ground. So if you have a mat or some kind of block that you can put on the ground, you can teach your horse to walk over to it and put a foot on it or put both feet on it. And that way, when you are walking together, you can sort of start to send your horse to the mark or to the block. And this begins to introduce him to this idea that he can actually leave you to do something, and then you're going to come to him with the food reward. The third strategy, so those were the first two, going around something or going towards something to stand on it. The third one is to use protected contact, which is another good way to begin establishing that you can still work at a distance and that it's okay. With protected contact, you're working with a fence in between you or some kind of barrier between you. And you can start by being quite close to each other if that's what your horse is used to. And then you can begin to do similar exercises with you creating more distance between yourself and the fence. And in this case, it's not really your horse creating the distance, which is ideal, but it still helps introduce the idea that distance is okay. But you just want to make sure that if your horse is really wanting to be close to you, that you just do this in a slow process so that he doesn't get too overwhelmed by the idea, and ask him for simple things. You can stand back at a distance and ask him for a step back. Something that's really simple, just to show him that you can still communicate without being super, super close to each other. The fourth strategy is using more space in the space that you're in. So a lot of the times, it's common to sort of get stuck in a particular area of the field or in an area of the arena, and you're doing your exercises in that particular spot. And if you start actually moving around the space, so if you start moving around your horse's field, or you start moving around your horse's the arena that you're working in, or whatever area, if it's big enough, then there's going to be moments where your horse has more distance from you because he's also looking around the area. So he may drift away from you to sniff something on the ground, or he may drift away from you a little bit because something caught his focus. And in that moment, you can use your bridge signal and following it up with a food reward, ensuring that you go to him with the food reward. Number 5 is one that I would use for really confident and playful horses, and that's when I actually use my energy and send them away from me. And this is not one that I would use with a really timid horse where that kind of energy directed towards them would actually break the relationship and make them nervous or scared. It's with the horses that are very confident, playful, and even quite social that I will use my energy towards them, either wave my hands or click a little bit, or wave the whip towards them in their direction to encourage them to actually go away, because I know that that is not going to break our relationship. If anything, sometimes it can make them more playful, and it can just bring their energy up, and it can make it more interesting for them, and they just get a little bit more interested and energetic by it, which is I've been a little bit conflicted, like sort of, do I want to direct that kind of energy towards them? But I haven't found anything bad that happens out of that, unless the horse is really scared of whips or really scared of anyone directing any energy towards them, because then they go, ooh, that was really uncomfortable. I don't want anything to do with that. And then you kind of broken a bit of trust, and then they walk away. But if it's a horse that's so confident and they really don't care, they're very comfortable with pressure, then I will use that towards them and say, hey, go for a little run. I'll do a little burst of energy in my own body as well. It's hard to describe in a podcast, I'm sorry. But sort of in the videos in the academy, I talk a bit about bursts of energy, and this encourages the horse to have a little burst of energy of his own and can trigger a little bit of a playful state as well, and you get more distance in that. But that brings us to the end of this episode. Those are the 3 reasons why I think that distance is incredibly important, and 5 little strategies as to how you can begin incorporating it into your own training with your horse. This episode was a little bit more directed towards those of you that have already come a fair way in your Liberty journey, so I hope it was helpful for you and it gave you some inspiration and ideas. If you're in the beginning of your journey and you're not at this stage yet, then that's totally okay, because this is really important to have in the back of your mind as you're going through the foundation and the beginning steps, that this is something that you will be working towards. Now, I really hope that those explanations of the strategies were clear enough for you to be able to think about and understand them, and perhaps try a little bit at home with your own horse. I am, of course, a little bit limited in how I can explain them to you without being able to show you, but that is why there's the Essence of Liberty Online Academy available for you if you want to dive really deep and you want to see different exercises in action. So if you are not a member of the Academy yet, I really hope to see you there soon. But if not, I will see you right here next week for another episode. Have an absolutely amazing day.